Oh, thank God it saved me. Yeah, you were just dropping too much alpha and it killed the electricity.
Your next career move could be the one you never imagined. Web3 nomads. Everywhere jobs, for anywhere people.
All right, welcome back. Another episode of the Ape Enclosure. We've got Gearbox in today. Been pestering these guys to come on for a while now, so really happy that they've joined us. Guys, how's it going? Thanks for joining.
I'm good. How are you?
Very, very good. Very, very good. Waiting to see what the markets and everything are doing. I think people are getting a little bit angsty, but yeah, really good. Everyone stopped shouting at each other anyway, because the markets have been a little bit more green, so everything's good.
Yeah, it's okay. China's gonna take us through. Just buy Chinese coins.
Yeah, that's kicks up the narrative. Everyone's an Asian expert at the minute, aren't they? So
no, everybody's become a Chinese coin expert at the moment.
Yeah, we just go from kind of fine art experts to macro laps to it's whatever the flavor of the week is. We wear many hats in this industry, don't we?
Yeah. So now everybody's claiming they know what the Chinese influencers are going to buy.
Everyone's trying to quickly learn Mandarin and get into the kind of WeChats and pick up on some alpha, but let's see.
Oh, that's not what I'm hearing on my WeChat group. Sorry, this isn't what you're talking.
All right, guys, can we get into maybe start with Muggle Sect and just some as much as or as little detail as you want to go into, just some basic origin stories. How many kind of bangs to the head did you have to take to want to work in this industry or be like a participant or operator in this industry? And then we'll get into Amplis after that.
So regarding me, I actually had the first opportunity to work in this industry back in 2017-18 with somebody who later on rugged their project. So I won't name them, but thankfully I did not take that up and instead joined a traditional FMCG company, worked there for a nice 3 years. And after that, I moved to Gearbox. And largely how that happened was I was shitposting in Discord and people thought I'm quite active. So they decided to me. And now I actually have to work and like turn up to these podcasts.
Shit posting is the new CV. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, that's it.
What about yourself, Amplis?
So my first like crypto interaction, I guess, was 2017-ish. I was working as a part of a kind of private equity company, like a small scale digital private equity company. And one of the partners wanted to do an ICO. And I was like, this sounds like a scam, man. And so like we had a falling out over that. But essentially that was my first interaction with crypto stuff, was like 2017 ICO, media. But my takeaway from that was like almost all ICOs are scams, and like I avoided sending ETH to any of those things. But ETH itself just intuitively made sense to me, so I like picked up the bag. Like smart contracts really made sense to me in a way that Bitcoin never really did because of its economic model. So I got into ETH and then like held it. Obviously, it went way down. Kind of ignored the whole crypto thing for a bit while I was holding the ETH, and then DeFi summer, I got sucked back in, and I was like, oh shit! Like people are actually building things. Like Maker was live, and Aave was going, and Yearn and Curve and all these things. So I started dipping my toes into like farms. Got like red pilled by Based. I don't know if you're around for Based.money.
Yeah.
But basically it was like a absolute shitcoin, but was advertised as such, and the memes were great. And I started doing memes for Based, and the rest is history, I guess. Just like I started
Nice.
doing videos, and then other people started asking me to do videos for them, and then yeah, started doing
And
videos for Gearbox, and then became a contributor.
here we are now. Yeah. Love the stories. Everyone's
Yeah.
always got a kind of funny route in. There is absolutely no traditional path into this industry, so it's always quite hilarious to hear how people got into the space. So
Yep.
who wants to start us off? Can we do we just did origin stories on yourselves, I suppose, but can we do like a high level origin story of Gearbox in and of itself? Because I think it's quite an interesting story.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
sure. So, Margot, you want to take this, or you want me to take this?
No, go ahead.
So Gearbox was birthed essentially by Mikhail, who is kind of, I don't know, lead dev contributor, at a hackathon, I believe in 2021. So they won an ETH hackathon, one of the big ones, with this idea of composable leverage. And after they won the hackathon, they basically immediately started building, to launch for V1. So the core idea of Gearbox is basically, the way that leverage has been done so far doesn't super make sense if the goal is for DeFi to become like a kind of replacement for TradFi, because the way that lending has worked so far, is basically everything is over collateralized, right? And we're not supposed to use the alternative to that word, like the opposite of that word, but basically with like Aave, with Compound, like these protocols are amazing, but you can't borrow more money than you've put in. So there's a whole range of kind of TradFi things that you can't do, right? So for example, it wouldn't make sense if you're like trying to buy a house, like to put in more money than you're borrowing to buy the house, because like then you could have just bought the house in cash or whatever. So most loans in TradFi are kind of collateralized by your reputation, which is enforced by the courts, right? So like if you don't pay back, then like somebody will come after you in court. In DeFi, we obviously don't have that privilege. So the primitive that Mikhail came up with, back during the hackathon, was, okay, you can borrow more money than you put in, but the money that you borrowed is kind of siloed off in this primitive credit account. And in that credit account, you can only do things where we can track the value of your position exactly, so that we can liquidate you if need be. But the idea is that that credit account, as DeFi progresses and as Gearbox progresses, you can add more things that you can do in that credit account, such that it's almost like a smart contract wallet with leverage. And basically that idea took hold, won the hackathon, and Gearbox was born.
Nice, love that. That was a great kind of overview. But I don't know if Mugler wants to kind of lead us into maybe just do a high level of what is Gearbox. I'm sure there'll be a lot of participants in the like who are listening after the fact that they've seen you guys, or they might be aware of you guys, and there might be some people in who are listening who are just completely unaware. So if you could get a high level of what Gearbox is, that'd be great.
Yep, sure. To make it like extremely simplified, Gearbox is a two-sided protocol. One is the lend side, one is the borrow side. The good part about the borrow side is that you can borrow more than what your collateral is by using a smart contract-based account that you open up with us, and that effectively builds up leverage for you. And since the assets that you're borrowing are real in nature, you can go ahead and stake them across DeFi protocols, making Gearbox effectively like the base layer of leverage for entirety of DeFi, right? I mean, if it is within certain security parameters, we can integrate that specific protocol. So currently we're present on Lido, Curve, Convex, Yearn, and thus we can provide you leverage directly natively on these protocols itself. On the other hand, because you're borrowing, because you're getting this leverage through borrowing of real assets, we also have a lending market, which is extremely efficient, right? Because if you look at lending markets, like Amplis just talked about the various ones, there's not enough capital efficiency. So even if you were to deposit in Aave and borrow out of it, it usually goes to about 85% LTV maximum, 90% LTV maximum for USDC, right? And that means that you are always borrowing less than uh, what collateral you have. So that takes a lot of capital efficiency. So we completely do away with that. In terms of capital efficiency, we are effectively a 1,000% efficient, right? If you look at it in that manner, because we can give you 10x the capital. On the other hand, if we again compare it, because of the kind of tech that we have, the CAs that we were talking about, since the capital and the borrower amount is always in the CA, it actually never goes to the direct custody of the borrower, which prevents a lot of good things, right? So we saw what happened with Avi and like how Avi, I think it was Avi, right, who went ahead and manipulated the price in order to create a bad debt of about $1.8 million. So
Yeah,
while
exactly.
$1.8 million is not like might not be too big a deal for a protocol with like Aves treasury, this shows some sort of like a design issue in terms of the safety mechanism. So this is again something that Gearbox does away with, because like we said, the assets always go to a smart contract. So they cannot swap it to any other asset that they want to. They can only swap it to the assets which are present in our allowed list. And how our allowed list is made is that it has a certain set of walls, pools, and coins in itself, where you can go ahead and swap to or stake into. So the risk that a lender has there on their LP is significantly reduced, because the chances of bad debt go to zero. And then in order to make sure that we are always able to capture that, we have a partnership with RiskDAO, where we have a live dashboard, and you can go ahead and check what the bad debt situation is, what the health factor is like, and if everybody were to be liquidated on the Gearbox protocol, whether or not we would be in bad debt or not. For V2, and I'm very happy to say this, to be honest, for 3.5 months, we have never been in a situation where we would have gone towards the bad debt side. So this is like a different mechanism on the lending side that Gearbox has created. And for me, the biggest uh, point over here is, so Aave is a pure lending thing, right? But you cannot be entirely certain of the utility. In Gearbox, we lend specifically so that the borrowers can go ahead and stake at a place where they can get more APY than they would get on the lending side. So we effectively create an arbitrage of interest rates between the borrow rate and the staking rate, right? So we can be higher than Aave. So the lenders can effectively make more than they would on any other lending protocol, but still keep the borrowers, uh, positive in terms of the kind of APYs they are making. So that's a very unique proposition that we have. Borrowers make money, lenders make more money through Gearbox. The protocol in itself will make money, and it's a win-win-win situation. Plus, whatever money is actually borrowed goes back to the DeFi protocols. So it's a very uh, nicely, you know, composed protocol if you look in that manner.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely fantastic, and I mean, there was multiple times, particularly to like in the last cycle, where you kind of hamstrung with your traditional lending and borrowing money markets with the collateral, and you can't exactly get into like a nice kind of DeFi strategy based off a lot of those markets. I mean, we've seen a little bit of iteration with the likes of Abracadabra and LP tokens, but not to the extent of what you can actually perform with Gearbox. And again, even if they use the likes of Bento Box and Looped a couple of times, you're still getting absolutely nowhere near the capital efficiency of what you can kind of see with the kind of structure that Gearbox have got set up as well. So, how do you guys think of leveraging that way? Like even with Loopin is suppose just to try and kind of get across to the audience like the difference of how much capital efficiency you guys can get with as opposed to the current kind of money markets on the market.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the larger
So
difference.
looping. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just take a minute and then I'll get back to Atlas. So there's a very significant difference between the two. In terms of looping, you're limited in terms of the kind of leverage that you can get to. It is leverage. I mean, in a manner, it is leverage. You can go 2x, 2.5x, or 3x. But then it gets to a limit where you can't loop in more, right? Because the incremental advantage to the overall leverage is not enough. In terms of Gearbox, how it's determined is through LTV. Where do we actually need to liquidate your collateral? If it's 25%, you're not going to be able to access too much leverage on it. If it's like, you can go down 95%, but the liquidity is high enough for the assets that you are swapping to or staking into, then it's not an issue. We can even probably go higher than 10x. But that's a situation on liquidity in itself. As liquidity grows in DeFi, Gearbox can increase the effective leverage that we can offer to a user. Obviously, risk goes hand in hand with increased leverage. So risk will go up for the user as well, but that's a situation they can take care of, which is something that's not entirely possible with looping.
Yeah, great answer.
Sorry, I'm just.
Is there anything
you want to add?
Yeah, so I was just gonna like draw a comparison. Looping is kind of like to draw an analogy to like TradFi, right? Looping is kind of like you borrowing money using your bank account to like ape into stocks, which is a kind of leverage, right? But using Gearbox is kind of like using a margin account, which is just a much like a way that makes more sense because the margin account was designed, right, with the idea of aping into stocks with leverage in mind, whereas your bank account kind of wasn't. So, you know, the conditions of using leverage, right, is just going to be much better for the product that's like specifically designed for that. Whereas like Aave or Compound weren't really designed with looping in mind. So these strategies that after the fact like implement looping, for example, with ETH staking or something like these strategies that like they put money into Aave and then they borrow and then they put it back into Aave and they borrow. It's just like it's like an elegant solution to the problem, and the problem is like we don't have the equivalent of kind of a interactive broker style margin account in DeFi. And that's essentially what Gearbox aims to be, right? Is a hub where you can get all the leverage you need, right, up to like safe limits, and then do anything in DeFi that you want to. That's like our end goal.
Yeah, great answer. You really get the point across really, really well. So what's the current state of under-collateralized loans and leverage in DeFi? I know there's the kind of a little bit of a taboo about it, and I understand why, given specific project structures. I know like the Maple guys and the Dam guys, and I think Maple had quite a bad run in towards end of last year and things like that. So why do you think that kind of? Do you think it's just a case of everything that everyone understands at this point in time is being completely over collateralized, and like the under collateralized is a little bit of a taboo? But I think with Gearbox and things like this, it completely blows that whole idea out of the water. So like, what's your understanding of the current under collateralized kind of landscape?
So we've been instructed to not use the term under collateralized. I think for the reasons that you mentioned, it's a little bit different the way that, for example, Gearbox works compared to Maple. I mean, Maple's great. I understand they had the tough situation, late last year. But fundamentally, what they're trying to do is a bit different from what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
So, in terms of like, what's a good term? In terms of protocols where you can like borrow more money than you've deposited as collateral. Okay, let's say. I think there's a couple of cases that exist. So, for example, there's the classic case of like perps. Like if you're trading perps, like it's synthetic, but essentially what you're doing is you're getting more bang for your buck, like compared to the money you put in, right? So you can like put in one, like the idea is you can deposit one ETH and then like punt up to like 10x or 20x, and you can do that on like Binance, and you can do that on like decentralized protocols like GMX or perp.fi or DYDX, etc. So that is, if you think about the way that that's structured, that is kind of a situation where you're able to use more monetary power than you've put into the protocol. So that's one example. Another example is like Alpha Homora, where you can do that, but with specific yield farms, right? But the problem with these protocols is that they restrict what you can do to just like one thing. So on perp trading platforms, decentralized or not, the only thing you can do is like punt and perps. With Alpha Homora, the only thing you can do is like get leverage for these specific yield farms, right? With Gearbox, the idea is that like we've created this credit account primitive, which almost acts like a smart contract wallet of sorts, with leverage. So you put in your funds, then you take your leverage, like 5x or whatever, and then there's like a range of different things you can do. So if you want to just margin trade, you can do that. You can margin trade on all the assets that are allowed within the credit account. If you want to like margin farm, you can do that. Farm with leverage, you can do that, and you can farm in multiple protocols, right? So like right now we have Curve, Convex, Yearn, blah blah blah, Lido, etc. But as we integrate more protocols, that is going to more and more look like, oh, this credit account can be used to do everything that you would want to do in DeFi. That's like above a certain safety threshold, if that makes sense. So I think it is a bit of a phase change in terms of protocols where you can like get more bang for your buck than you put in. I think it's a bit of a phase change because the number of things you can do within Gearbox is just much higher than any of the alternatives out there.
Yeah. I'll just add to that a bit, like what my thought process on like under-collateralized lending and that bit is. To start with, one, we are not in the business of under-collateralized lending, and I'll get to why. On the under-collateralized lending, I think the biggest issue that we see in this industry is the factor that it's either limited, or second, the reason why it's even risky, even like traditional world, and that is that you have to trust somebody on it, right? And you have to trust their choices on it. And that is where I believe Gearbox differs wildly from any other protocol. The kind of tech that we have, the credit accounts that we use, they effectively never let the borrower custody the funds directly, right? When you open a credit account, the funds go to the credit account, not to your own wallet. So we effectively made that trust aspect that makes under-collateralized lending risky, trustless. And that is where the first key feature comes in. And the second, why we are not under-collateralized and why we are leverages, because we limit the use of the funds that are in the CA as well, right? Like we said, loudless that we have. So again, because you can go to a certain safe number of protocols, you can only swap to them. So we are just giving you leverage on them, and we aren't giving you like a open-ended money directly to your wallet. And that's where it kind of works very well, because we eliminate the key pain point, which is the trust aspect in the under-collateralized lending, and we are leveraged because of the fact that the way that we implement it effectively. So that's where the differentiation comes in.
Yeah, that's great. It feels like when DeFi, the initial DeFi summer was just hotting up and everyone was banging on about smart contracts and trustlessness, and it feels like some of the analogies that people were using back then is like Gearbox is just a perfect representation of that, like peer-to-peer to peer-to protocol kind of trustless nature of the actual product. So it's really, really nice to kind of see that come full circle. So I suppose kind of as the different strategies and different protocols that integrate in, that just creates much higher demand for people wanting to use those products. And then on the lender side, I suppose if the demand increases, then people who want to passively just earn in Gearbox, that obviously also increases as well. So that's a complete supply and demand kind of market dynamic there, if that's correct.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good part is on the lending side, the lending rates. I mean, you go through the DeFi Llama page on lending, like what the general 30-day API has been. You would see that majority of the same have very similar rates over a 30-day period, right? Like 1.2, 1.3, or whatever on WETH and something like that. The good part about Gearbox is that we don't need to be, close to those rates. We can be higher as long as we are lower than the staking APYs you can make otherwise, right? Because that's where the arbitrage comes in. So we can incentivize LPs to put in money in Gearbox in a much safer manner. Borrowers still make money, and that's the good part. And in terms of the integrations itself, some alpha V3 will be coming out somewhere around Q2, and that's where I think we see the next step. How I see Gearbox at the moment is like V1 was a great proof that the tech that we are trying to build out will work. We saw that the first time. V2 was improvement in terms of one on the UX, second on the capability of that tech itself, the value that it could manage, the integration that it could possibly have, and that's why we were able to get that 100 million TVL within like 4 days, right? I mean, that November, that was an amazing period for us. And the next step is now going to be to increase the protocols, to increase the kind of usage that Gearbox has. So I think V3 will be the base of how we move this lending market and the leverage market that we have in order to create a protocol that's more open, that's more trustless, and effectively the first step towards probably like $1 billion TVL.
We're kind of in a great
Nice.
position where like the core product that we offer, which is the credit account side, is like really high in demand. And right now our limiting factor is that we actually need more lenders. And like I understand that the lending side is like more boring. There's like you just deposit your funds and it's passive, right? But because of the high demand for credit accounts, the lending side APY is actually like pretty good. I think they're probably best in the market right now for reasonably high profile protocols. Um, so like for example, like on the lending side, because there's so much demand for credit accounts, like ETH is offering like better than you get like staking. Yeah, the APYs are better than you get staking, and like USDC and DAI are like consistently like 5-6% or something like that when you factor in the token incentives that we have. So yeah, like we're in a weird position now where like the credit accounts are really in demand and we have to like try to pump the TVL on the other side so that we can meet the demand. So it's an interesting time for Gearbox.
Yeah, I mean, it came out of the gates with kind of V1 and just showed instant kind of product market fit and proof of concept, I suppose. So with regards to that scaling, how does Gearbox go about, like, how are new strategies proposed? How are they kind of thought out? How are they kind of strategized? Is it kind of, because it's obviously early stage, is it a few kind of key figures contributing to Gearbox that suggest, and then it goes to a DAO vote? Because sometimes, like you guys, I don't need to tell you guys, but just for people who are listening, sometimes when something's this great and new and novel, when they immediately go to DAO vote, or sometimes people pull in opposite directions and like things struggle to get over the line and things like that. So I just wondered how quick you can push new strategies and what the whole process looks like for scaling new strategies and new protocol integration and things like that.
So I think there are like two ways that happens. One way is, so like we're a DAO, everything that gets integrated has to be voted on, right? But before there's ever a vote, like the contributing developers have to actually like write the code to integrate something, obviously. So like I think it works in two ways. Like one way is Mikhail and the other devs will basically like Ilgiz and everybody else, will basically like survey the landscape of DeFi and be like, oh, what looks interesting, what has good yields and seems safe, right? And then they'll go to the risk folks, primarily risk DAO, and be like, oh, does this make sense to add either as a kind of asset that you can deposit and borrow on the LP side, or as a strategy, depending on which side of things you're integrating in. And so like they will survey the landscape and kind of look for things that look interesting. But I think more intriguing maybe to the listeners, especially people who work on protocols, is the other way that things have been integrated, and we're seeing more and more of this now, is basically like in our governance forums, we've had several occasions where people from other protocols have just posted like, hey, we were thinking about, like, could you integrate this asset or this strategy? And that gets serious discussion. And I believe like in the next version, we will start seeing some of the integrations that came from that process, including, I think, Frax and LDUSD and some other things. So those are the two ways that new things get integrated. But I think more and more we'll see the latter, particularly in cases where, for example, I don't know for sure that this will happen, but like if protocols want to like incentivize um, on top of like whatever incentives already exist, right? Um, that then becomes interesting because you're getting like leverage yields and then potentially other incentives on top of that. So yeah, anybody who wants like Gearbox, either to build on top of Gearbox or for Gearbox to integrate their protocol, just like post in the governance farm, and probably we'll investigate it and see if it makes sense to build out. Yeah.
Yeah. My view actually here is how we look at it is if it's liquidatable, then we can safely liquidatable effectively. Then it's something that can be integrated, right? I mean, that's the larger thought process, but that's not the only way to look at it. It must have a strong enough TVL because there's opportunity cost. The APYs should be something that show a trend that's higher than what our borrow APYs are, because that would make sense for the CS to then borrow. And they should have enough liquidity in the Texas itself, a chain link oracle that has been performing consistently, and as well as if you look at like the historical black swans or historical trends, like extreme trends on the particular asset or what or whatever that you want to talk about, they should be when we backtest them, we should not be getting too much of a bad debt or any of the bad debt, to be honest. And if we can set an LTV on it, that's where a talk then really begins, that whether or not should we do it. Once we have all these criteria figured out, whether they are not safely liquidatable, whether they have enough liquidity, whether or not the Chainlink Oracle works, if the API is something that is going to help increase the borrow chances, we put it to vote and then the tower decides after discussion. Yeah.
Nice. That becomes really, really interesting for projects that would like the integration, because they've got to kind of think then at that point in time, it's if they want it to be kind of put through, approved by governance, it's like what's the unit cost to try and sway the vote in our favor, and what's the kind of unit dynamics like there, how much how much is it going to cost us to kind of get this over the line and things like that. That's a really interesting dynamic, because there's a million and one projects out there that definitely benefit from that. I suppose that just creates its own kind of Gearbox flywheel on top of that. So that's a really, really nice dynamic.
Actually, how I look at it is probably projects can benefit in two manners, right? I mean, we are obviously so. I mean, I think the leverage part about Gearbox is just so interesting that everybody looks towards that side. I think the LPing side is also very interesting because, like Amplis just said, the rates have been so good that you can make really good use of it. Plus, these token incentives at play, right? So currently, we have a vote that's going on Balancer to set up a gauge towards the LP side, not towards the leverage side. So they want to lend more money to Gearbox using the additional LP they have in order to generate more interest for the people who LP and effectively make them more money. which I think is a very interesting way to look at it, right? Because we do not custody and the safer bit that we have on the LP side, and add to that the rates that we have. So protocols, I think, can take advantage of it in two manners. Plus, the LP side, if you look at it, is actually much easier because you do not have to create an integration. You don't need to go through a DAO board. You can simply make use of the advantage of having higher interest rate through leverage without actually having to go towards that side.
I didn't even think of that. There's so many people out there, particularly if you're a DEX. We've seen it definitely towards the end of last year. The amount of completely wasted token emissions that they've tried to use, incentivizing depth of liquidity, and a lot of it's just complete mercenary capital. They don't necessarily care. They're just trying to stay there for the high emissions and high token incentives. So this could be a complete kind of game changer of how people get out of the gates and trying to incentivize depth of liquidity.
Exactly. And it's withdrawable anytime. There's no illiquidity. It's linear. I mean, so the only thing you're going to be worried about is the gas cost, right? And everything is verifiable anytime. You don't have to trust. So I think it's a very good scenario for protocols to actually put their money on. You do not have to think about purely leverage. I mean, eventually we're going to be the base layer of leverage in DeFi. So yeah, we're going to be available for all the protocols. But for any assets or money that you have that you're not utilizing at the moment, you can generate yields on it without any worries. So I think that's a great way to utilize Gearbox as well.
Yeah, I mean, even those protocols sat on quite large, handsome treasuries or protocol on liquidity and things like that. I just completely missed that when I was doing some research. And it's just as soon as you said it, it just clicked instantly. So that's really, really interesting. So what's the it's like on the kind of back end infrastructure side. What does that process look like? Is it like a 4626 vol, or like how does the kind of assets stay non-custodial effectively?
Non-custodial on the borrower side, you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So when you open a credit account, that's an isolated smart contract where the funds are going. So while the contract is now linked to your wallet, like the contract knows that it's this particular wallet that is operating it, you can merely direct the contract towards a pool or towards a swap. You can never own these assets. You can never withdraw the assets from that smart contract. So you do not ever get the ownership of it, but you get the direction of it. And even the direction of it is then further limited to the safer protocols, like we talked about the LTV bit, and how the safe liquidity is the aspect that determines what they can swap to or stake into. So that is how the ownership never goes to the borrower, actually.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a really, really nice innovation. I really, really like that. So, so what kind of? I think we touched upon it a little bit, just to reiterate that. What kind of leverage would, let's say, I've got $1,000, $10,000. I want to come to the protocol, and there's a nice kind of strategy on the leverage side. What kind of capital efficiency and leverage could one expect? Is it purely down to how much the lending market is, how the depth of the lending market, or is that kind of dynamic in and of itself, or how does that work?
Yeah.
So in terms of leverage limits, in terms of leverage limits, right now it's 10x basically. So let's say you come to Gearbox and you have like 10 ETH or whatever. You can essentially get like 100 ETHs worth of exposure, and that's the limit at the moment. I think any higher than that, and you get into like dicey situations where you can be liquidated almost immediately for like just absolutely normal market movements, even within. So, for example, let's take a really simple strategy, right? As a thought example. So let's say you want to like just stake into Lido as your strategy, and let's say that's yielding 5%, right? So you take your 10 ETH, you can put it into Gearbox, get 10x exposure. So you have 100 ETH now. You stake it all into Lido, so you have like 100 staked ETH, and that's earning 5%. So on the 90 ETH you've borrowed, for example, you might be paying like 3%, let's say. So on all the borrowed funds, on all the funds that you borrowed, you're earning 2%, because 5% staked ETH yields minus your 3% borrow. And then you earn 5% on your initial 10 ETH that you deposited as well. So that's essentially how it would work. But at 10x leverage, the risk is, right, a small deviation in the price of staked ETH compared to ETH. Like those two things are pegged quite well right now. But even a small deviation could lead you to be liquidated, and that's kind of the risk, and that's why the limit is 10 ETH. But essentially, sorry, 10x. But essentially, like at 10x leverage, you're going to be earning like 10 times what you would earn minus, like, you take your 10 times the yield, but then minus 10 times the borrow cost, if that makes sense. So provided that the strategy that you're using has higher yield than the cost to borrow, all that yield is additional on top of your original yield from the collateral that you.
Yeah, that's what's great about what's happened during the kind of bear market. There's been so much kind of innovation that's came out at the other side. If you were using that specific stake ETH strategy that you were speaking of there, you could even look to the likes of, if you were worried about the de-pegging risk, if you want to call it that, you could even look to use the hedge vault on Y2K or something, so you kind of minimally protect on that downside with expected large payout as well. So really exciting time, really, like, lots of kind of really innovative stuff going on. So can we get into the Gear token? Just if there's any interesting dynamics, what's it all about? How is it incorporated into the DAO and the protocol? Just love to hear that. I don't know if anyone wants to pick that up. Maybe Muggle start that off.
Gear token. All right. So at the moment, it's largely a governance token, but we have some utility discussions going on at the moment. And, there are a few things that are popping up, but nothing's concrete. So I'm not sure if I should talk too much on that side, but there are larger ideas, right? So how CowSwap at the moment uses Cow as discounts and fee. So one idea is regarding that. Another is like using it as a token for a feature economy. So we have actually pretty cool features, right? If you're on Gearbox and you want to open a strategy, say on Lido, you do not actually have to go ahead and first borrow on Gearbox, then connect to Lido, then go ahead and Lido, and then open up a position. We have something called ready strategies. So you can, in a single click, you can go through this entire process. You will have a CA opened, you will have it staked, and you will have the STTH in your account. So that's a pretty cool feature to have, to be honest. And similarly, like that, now we're coming up with automation on chain. So we are coming up with very cool features, right? Which will have stop loss, which will have limit orders, which will have health factor management, which will have liquidation management, all of these capabilities directly on chain. So for people to be able to use these features, we might go ahead and have like a feature economy where you pay to use these features, which does make sense, to be honest, because devs are putting in a lot of work. Our resources are being used, so there's a cost involved. So to have them up for free might not entirely justify the overall fee structure that we have at the moment. Beyond that, there's also staking in order for revenue share and things like these. So we're still under discussion. And these are cool discussions, obviously, right? I mean, the things that I'm talking about, these are things that will eventually turn into utility. We just don't know which ones will. For which the DAO is currently analyzing and holding discussions. So that's largely on the token bit at the moment.
Nice. So you're building those tools in house as well, not using kind of third party providers.
Yeah, absolutely. We held, so the Gear bots is what we're calling the automation scripts. They will
Nice.
effectively work like bots, and they're a cool part of V3 in itself. So when V3 comes out, you'll have Gear bots available, which I think is something that will significantly take up the UX that we have on the protocol at the moment.
Yeah, love that. So
We're
what's
calling it V2.1.
V2.1,
Where's the
we are
V3
checking
now?
that out. It's too good. I mean, the overall changes that we are making to the protocol, they're too good to be called V2.1. It will be an injustice to the dev's efforts. So it's a V3.
Love that. So what can we expect in the kind of short to near term? Is there anything that people should be kind of looking out for or aware of, or is there anything that you'd like to kind of push people's kind of mind share towards?
Three things actually, to be exact. One is LLSG, which is leverage LSG. At the moment, if you want to natively gain leverage towards staking, leverage liquid staking, the best way to go about it is Gearbox. 10x on Lido. CBETH is being added as we talk. So, yeah, definitely LLSG is something that is bound to go pick once Shanghai happens. The second thing is we now will have MIM enabled from next week. So we have the curve and the convex ones, which means on stable coins itself, you can earn over 45% APY, which is massive. And this is like net APY, not gross. So it includes the interest that you'll be paying on borrow of USDC or DAI, whatever you want to borrow. Obviously, MIM has that bad debt of about 6.5%. So there are risks involved, and you should, manage it accordingly. But that's a pretty cool one. And the third one is that we're going to have a collateral pool for fracks coming up as well. So you can go ahead and borrow fracks in order to open up more positions. So yeah, that's largely it in terms of near term.
I'll add, like, I know Muggle mentioned Gearbox already, but the bots are going to allow a level of automation that is just really cool. So you'll be able to, like, so number one, basically, so the way that the bots work is kind of like if you imagine like when you're using CalSwap or something, right? Essentially, you're giving permission to uh, the smart contract to like allow you to allow somebody else to execute a trade on your behalf whenever the price is within the range that you want, right? That's essentially how CalSwap works and some other like aggregator DEX aggregators. So like the way that works is basically you set a parameter of okay, what can people like under what circumstances can other people execute this transaction for me, and then like there's like relayers or whatever who basically see these possibilities and then they can earn a little like a small fee for doing those transactions on your behalf. And that's how a lot of like DEX aggregators work. We're essentially bringing that same concept into Gearbox, except that the kinds of things that these bots will be able to do will be much greater. So, for example, you'll be able to protect your what we call health factor, right? Keep your credit account unliquidated and healthy using a bot. So, like when you come close to liquidation, for example, you can like set it so that these bots will do XYZ things to protect your account from liquidation. You can do things like trading, just like you would with a DEX aggregator, right? So limit order trading, like when like ETH BTC falls below this range, then we want to buy or sell or whatever. And yeah, just like automated strategies as well. So this is probably less for like individual users, but other protocols and GigaBrains will be able to build even like more complex strategies on top of Gearbox using bots because basically you can like reasonably expect that this pool of keepers or whatever will enact the transactions as you've laid out because they would be paid fees, right? So we go beyond just like kind of static strategies where you have to do everything yourself. So for example, if you want to like ape into staked ETH, you do that, and then if you want to change to some other strategy, you kind of have to do that manually at the moment. But what bots will allow is like you can set up a system where it's like, okay, when APY of staked ETH is above a certain percent, we want to be fully in staked ETH. But when the curve pool like the staked ETH curve pool via Convex has a higher APY than that for, let's say 5 days, so it's not just a blip, then we switch over to that strategy, and that can run in an automated way, right? So then you can just create your strategy and set it aside, and you can do things like switching based on APYs or switching between different strategies for whatever reasons you want. So like I'm really excited for the bots thing because it kind of opens up the design space of what's possible when you're thinking about creating strategies for Gearbox.
Yeah, so like, just stop me if I'm getting this wrong. So in its most basic form, if I was kind of, let's say, 5x long on a specific strategy, obviously 20% drawdown minus your liquidation fee, and I'm happy to incur maybe like a 10% drawdown, then anything below that I want out. Not going to be able to be around at the computer all day monitoring that. Don't want to have sleepless nights and things like that. So the bots could come into play there, and I could just set my stop at effectively the 10% drawdown and not have to face the full kind of liquidation. Is that correct?
Exactly correct. Yeah. So you can set a bot to be like, oh, if the strategy, like for whatever reason, is losing money, like at this point, I just want to pull back to my base asset, right? And if you're in your base asset that you borrowed, you're fine. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
Nice. What is the liquidation fee? Is that fixed or is it dynamic?
That's a good question. I think it's fixed at the moment.
Yeah, it's fixed.
You look up the
So
docs.
4% for the liquidator and 1.5% for the DAO.
Yeah, that makes sense. Gents, really appreciate you joining. I thought I'd cracked it all, and then you threw a few curveballs in there that I completely didn't foresee. So really interesting. I'm pretty sure some of the listeners have found some really insightful information there as well. Where's best to kind of find you guys? Like, where would you want people to be kind of directed towards? How can they get involved?
They can pop up in our Discord, honestly, and post a comment, and they'll get a reply if they directly want to talk about it, or just DM on Twitter if they want to.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, thanks again for joining. Really appreciate it, and everyone who's listening, I'm sure you enjoyed that one as much as me. And would love to kind of have you guys on later in the year when some of these kind of updates come out, kind of show off the UI and how it's all used and things like that. But yeah, once again, really appreciate you joining me today, and thanks very much.